All right, here we go, guys. So linking the assessment to the curriculum. So for this training, the objectives are going to be using the present levels of performance and flow chart to determine appropriate functional academic lessons to teach. Setting up program masters and student program data books. We'll go over that a little bit, and then understanding the assessment to curriculum connection. So this is where we are in our process of implementation arrow. We talked about assessing each student. We talked about beginning portfolio components. Now we're going to talk about setting up program data books and linking the assessment to the curriculum. So for this section of the training, you'll need just to refer to your program masters and your program data. We talked about setting up the data books. That binders work best. 2-inch binders for the student program data books. There's a flyer that you put in the sleeve for the front. There's a spine you put in the side, and then there's the tabs you're going to put in the inside. So most teachers find it easiest to keep the data sheets for the current lessons in the notebook or in a binder. With this format, the notebooks are easily stored and accessible for students and staff because you want everybody to be able to just go grab and go when they're going to start instruction. When you're going to prepare the program masters, there is a sheet in your materials. It's going to talk to you about setting up program masters and using hanging file folders. This middle picture shows you where you're going to have. They have the lesson plans on the left tabs, and the right tabs are the data sheets that go with the lesson plan. It makes it easy if you have these available for staff to access them so that you don't have to stop instruction and go look for them. If a staff is saying, I need a data sheet for lesson plan A and functional reading, if you have it organized and in an area they can access it, they don't have to ask you that. They can just go and get it. So there's great information in the program for preparing your masters. Copies and hole punching. So most teachers also find it easiest to keep the data sheets and lessons completed and lessons yet to be taught in a file cabinet, or you could keep everything in one large notebook with dividers. We recommend 10 copies of each lesson plan and 20 to 30 copies of each data sheet. I wouldn't recommend running off every lesson and every data sheet in the beginning. What I would do is I would assess all of my students and determine what lessons they needed and the corresponding data sheets. Then I would run off 10 copies of those lessons they need and 20 to 30 copies of those data sheets and have them stored away. I would also do the same for the lesson that would come after that lesson, so that you slowly start building it up instead of running them all off at one time, because that can be kind of overwhelming and costly. So just a hint. The other thing to do is if you're running them off and you're hole punching them, I would hole punch the lesson plans on the right-hand side of the sheet like it shows in the picture, and the lesson plans on the left-hand side of the sheet. That way, when you open the book, you have your lesson plan on the left that you can read, because it's going to tell you what instructions and what to say. And then you're going to have your lesson plan on the right, so you can sit there and write down the data as you're giving the instruction. Just makes it easier, because if you do it all or hole punched on the same side, then you're having to flip back and forth between the lesson plan and the data sheet, which is kind of cumbersome when you're trying to teach, because let's face it, because I don't know about you, but I often felt like I was an octopus, because I'm managing materials, I've got this data sheet, I've got my lesson plan, and just if you can hole punch it like they show it here, it's going to make life a lot simpler. For this session of the training, you're going to also need your assessment teacher's manual, which is the black spine, this one, and your curriculum, which is with the white spine, okay? So connecting the assessment to the curriculum, we talked about this just briefly in the first PowerPoint. So first you're going to assess, and from that assessment, you're going to determine the present levels of performance, right? So once you have the present levels of performance, then you're going to look at a flow chart. And we talked about the flow charts are at the end of each assessment section and at the beginning of each curriculum area. Once you look at the flow chart, it's going to tell you the lesson plan and data sheet that you're going to use for your student. Once you determine the lesson plan and data sheet, those have on them long and short-term goals. You're going to take those long and short-term goals, and as the year goes on, you're going to start writing them into IEPs. I don't recommend going in and rewriting, once you've done an assessment, rewriting every IEP for your students. That is crazy making. What I do suggest is assessing your students, getting them placed, use your flow chart, figure out the lesson plans and data sheets, figure out, and by using those, they're going to tell you your long and short-term goals. And then as your students' IEPs start rolling through, you start rolling through the year and their IEPs start coming up, then I would start rolling those goals and objectives into your IEPs. Don't rewrite all your IEPs at one time, because that's just crazy making. So for example, so here's a sample of an assessment. This is a secondary example, but it's almost identical to elementary. And if you're following along in your own materials, the only difference is that elementary also assesses digital time, okay? So this is what the present levels of performance looks like. And that, remember, that's the beginning of that assessment area. So I'm going to go turn the page and look at the scores. So the student can match time. So it looks like when I look at all these circles along here, the student got all the answers correct. And lo and behold, at the bottom, when I look at the equation, yes, the student did. The student got 100% accuracy. So let's go up to the top of this slide. Determining present levels of performance and next step. Well, it says if the student gets 80% or more correct, mark on the present levels of performance level 1, and then go to the next section for assessment. So when I change the slide here, okay, here's my present level of performance, level 1, and this student got 100% matching analog time. So I'm going to put an X in that box because they met criteria, correct? So now I'm going to go to the next analog time assessment, and these are pictures of the assessments. So the next one they went to was hours, and the student got 100% accuracy. So it says, well, if they get 100%, if they meet that one, the next area you're going to assess is areas by or time by the half hours. The student got 80%. Well, 80% meets criteria. So that means I'm going to go assess the next area, which is quarter hours. The student got 80% accuracy. That meets criteria. So now I'm going to assess the next area, which is telling time by 5-minute increments. But uh-oh, we didn't get 80% or 100, we got 60%. Okay, so we're not going to continue assessing past that point because we got 60% accuracy. So when you're determining the present levels of performance level and next step, remember when we got down to telling time, we test 4, which was telling time by 5-minute increments, we did not meet 80% accuracy, right? It was 60%. So now we're looking at this and it tells us in the assessment manual, test 4, if you get less than 80% correct, you leave that one blank on the present levels of performance chart and go to the next content area for assessment, time management, right? So this next slide, we're going to look. So the student had matched analog time. They told time by the hours and they met criteria. The same for half hours and quarter hours, they met criteria. But remember, they did not meet criteria for telling time by 5-minute increments. So we don't put an X in there. We leave that one blank, and that becomes our goal, right? So now when I'm going to go look at the curriculum flow chart. So we matched analog time, yes, go to the next assessment. We told time by the hour, yes, go down to the next assessment. We told time by the half hours, yes, go down to the next assessment, and on until we got to 5-minute increments, and we did not meet criteria on that. And so that was a no. So now we're going to move across, and it's going to tell us the curriculum lessons that we're going to teach: time telling A and time telling F. And those are the lessons and the corresponding data sheets that we're going to pull from the curriculum. So we're going to go find those lesson plans. Time telling A is using a schedule. Well, that's a great thing to teach because they use schedules all day long, right? Because that's how they navigate their day. So yeah, we're going to use time telling A using a schedule, and time telling F is our other lesson plan we're going to use, telling time by 5-minute increments. And in this one, it notes analog clock, right? So we're going to pull those two lesson plans and their corresponding data sheets. And we're going to put them in their program data books. So we're going to put them behind the tab for time telling in their program data book. So here's the teacher tip. Transfer PLOP's present levels of performance to the PLOP chart. The PLOP chart is in your curriculum book, and it is behind the section marked Implementation Tools. Implementation Tools. And when you turn the page, here is your PLOP chart. It is all areas of assessment, and you're going to put this in, you're going to fill this out from your assessment book, and then you're going to put it under implementation tools in your students' program data book. So when you open their data book, that present levels of performance chart will be in there, marking where the student was assessed in each area. And it's just a handy thing to have in there. It's great to be able, when you come into a classroom, to be able to go in and, oh, this is where they are. It's just a quick guide, and it's a great thing for teachers to use. So I highly recommend it. Normally, I would give you a chance to practice and to break into groups. We don't have time for that today. So we're going to go through and do some scenarios together. So scenario, time telling. For elementary, your student can tell time by hours. Your student cannot tell time by half hours, right? So secondary, same thing for you guys. Your student can tell time by hours. They cannot tell time by half hours. So when we look at what is the PLOP level, for elementary, they can match analog time, they can tell digital time, they can tell time by hours. You're going to put X's in all those areas because that's what you assessed. But remember, we talked about they do not tell time by half hours, right? So for elementary, you're going to look at your curriculum flow chart, and you're going to start at the top. They match time, they can tell digital time, they can tell time by hours. So then you're going to go to telling time by half hours. You did the assessment, they did not meet criteria. So now you're going to go across on your flow chart because you had a no, they couldn't do it. And now it's going to tell you on the curriculum and lessons which lesson plans that you need to pull and data sheets, and that's where your student's going to begin their instruction. For secondary folks, your PLOP chart looks a little bit different. Your student matched analog time, and they could tell time by hours. You're going to put X's in both those boxes on their present levels of performance chart. They couldn't tell time by half hours though, so we're leaving it blank because they couldn't do it. That's your starting point. What programs are you going to teach? Well, when you look at your curriculum flow chart, they did analog time, or they did matched analog time, yes. So then you took them to telling time by hours. They could do that, yes. So now you assess them time to the half hours. They could not do that at criteria. So you move across the chart to the right-hand side, and that's your beginning goal or point where you're going to start instruction in telling time. Okay? All right, money math, bills. So here's a scenario. For elementary, your student can identify and count numbers, match numbers to corresponding objects, and count by ones. Your student could not count by fives, okay? For secondary, it's going to be a little bit different. The student can match money and count by ones. The student cannot count by fives. So we're going to do the secondary present levels of performance first. So here it is. They could match bills. They could count by ones. They could not count by fives. So because they could do the first two skills, we're going to put X's in there and leave blank count by fives. And that's going to be your starting point for instruction. So now go look at we're going to look next. Here's your curriculum flow chart. They could match bills, they could count by ones, but they could not count by fives. So now we're going to not go any further down the chart. We're going to go across to the right, and that's going to tell us exactly which lesson plans we're going to pull to teach that skill. For elementary folks, we talked about your student was able to identify and count numbers, so you're going to put an X in that box. Your student matched numbers to corresponding objects. We're going to X that one because they met that criteria. And your student counts by ones. So we're going to put an X in that box because he could do it. Okay, what we're leaving blank is count by fives because your student could not count by fives. And that's going to be our starting point. So when you look at your curriculum flow chart, you're going to go down, down, down until you see counts by fives, because remember, our student couldn't do that. We're going to go across the chart to the curriculum and lessons, and that's your starting point. Functional reading. Elementary, the students cannot identify letters and sounds. The student cannot identify his or her name. Secondary, the student cannot identify his or her name, and the student cannot read any sight words. So for this one, the student for elementary couldn't identify name or recognize letters and sounds. So you're going to put the date outside of the box to the left on your present levels of performance and put an X out there. That's to denote that you did assess, but the student didn't meet criteria. So now we know where we're going to begin. Looking at your curriculum flow chart, letters and sounds, could the student do letters and sounds? Nope. So you're going to go across, and that's going to be the lesson plan you're going to start. Notice under letters and sounds, there's an and or. That means these two things, letters and sounds and name identification, are done at the same time, right? So because your student couldn't do either of those skills, you're going to go across to the curriculum lessons and pull those lessons for identifying sounds, matching sounds and letters, and identifying name. And those are going to be what you put under functional reading in their student program data book. Okay. Secondary, same for you guys. The student couldn't identify their name. So you're going to put an X outside of the box to the left with a date to denote, yes, I did teach this skill, or I did assess this skill, excuse me, I misspoke. But the student didn't meet criteria. Okay. So what programs are you going to teach? Identifies name and or reads sight words from lists 1 through 3. That's really small, I can't hardly read that. But anyway, it tells you what sight words list that you're going to work on. Remember, there was an and or here, and that means you're going to teach these two together at the same time. So you go across and it tells you what lesson plans you're going to pull for identifying name, and what sight word list you're going to pull. And those are what's going to go in the program data books. Scenario 4, the student can match colors, identify colors, and understand words for colors. That's for elementary. For secondary, students aren't taught colors. That's one of the things that drops when you move from secondary to elementary, or elementary to secondary, my bad. So for secondary students, they're going to learn something different and be assessed on something different, and that is the student can write personal information in words for numbers both with and without a model. Okay, so let's do the secondary first. What is the present levels of performance? Okay, so the student can write personal information with a model, writes words and words for numbers with a guide, writes personal information, they met criteria there, writes words for numbers. So they met criteria, right? Well, when we go over to writing and we look at the flow chart and we got all these yeses, the present level, write words for numbers with or without a guide, plot levels 2 and 4. Yes, no, you're going to work on writing, check writing. And also for writing personal information, yes and no, whether they can do it or not, you're going to work on filling out forms. Because even if they can do those skills for the assessment, it doesn't hurt them to learn and practice writing, check writing, and filling out forms, because there's so many different types of checks or types of forms that they would have to fill out that you're going to work on it, and you can work on generalizing across different types and fonts and formats. For elementary, your student can match colors, identify colors, understand words for colors. They met criteria, right? Well, like the previous one for the secondary folks, if you come down to the bottom, it says your present levels of performance is understands words for colors, plop level 3. You can do it, then you don't teach it. But if you can't do it, then you are going to teach it. And you're going to teach color C, color to word comprehension, and functional reading. Those are the ones you're going to pull as lesson plans. So it tells you exactly what you're going to do and where to go in the curriculum. For your teaching materials, the left hand, you've got your thumb drive. If you've got the deluxe teaching materials kits, you've got your kits. There's a lot of additional materials on your thumb drives for you to access, especially like for secondary folks for filling out forms and writing checks. There's a number of different ones on there that you can practice, have your students practice filling out. And then we're just going to talk about your reproducible materials and your teaching materials kit here. We kind of went over this already. All teaching materials can be found on the flash drive that comes with the teaching package. They are organized by content area and lesson plans. So all of this is in files on your flash drive. It has a ton of information on it. Get in there, start looking around and playing with, exploring. You're going to be surprised by all the materials you find on there. Flashcards on the thumb drive come in 3x5, 4x6, and 5x8 format. And you can find them on the flash drive by referring to pages, sheets, or card sets. And I would say, even if you got the deluxe teaching package, there is the likelihood that you might want to run additional sets of cards, because I often had students working on alphabet recognition at the same time. And so we needed more than one set of alphabet capital letter cards or lowercase cards. And so you're going to find those on your flash drive. So you can run additional sets if you need them. And like I said before, I highly recommend laminating. I used a desktop laminator versus the laminating machine in the copy room with the big rollers. I like the desktop laminators because you can get 5 milliliter and 7 milliliter, my tongue is getting tied, thickness. It lasts longer than the stuff that's on the rolls in your office or copy room. I found the stuff on those large laminating machines tended to peel. So I highly recommend this. Hold on, guys, we got a question. Yes, there are printed labels for the hanging folders. There are, and then also they're also on the flash drive, and they tell you, I think on one of the forms for putting together your kits and stuff, she also listed on there what type of Avery labels, if you needed to make more labels. She also lists access and places where you can get Velcro for reasonable prices. And so, yeah, that's all within some of your program master's information that that was sent with your materials. All righty. All lines are aligned to be able to be cut in one large stack. So if you do if you run off a bunch of 3x5 cards and you put them to stack them together, you should be able to cut through 4 or 5 pages at one time and not have a problem. If you're good at cutting machines, I'm always a little challenged with them. So I usually don't go over 5 sheets at a time, but that's dependent on you. And then there's pages that can be cut and copied and laminated for multiple uses. And like I said, I can't say it's enough time. Lamination is your friend. Makes your materials last longer and keeps you having from remaking them and copying them more frequently. So lamination is your friend. Your flash drive also has hundreds of filled out samples and engaging activities. We talked about this a little bit already for like filling out forms. It's just, there's a lot of resources on your thumb drive, so just utilize them. We're not going to do this activity, but be sure that if you got the Deluxe Teaching Kit, go through your files and your cards and become familiar with them. It just makes life easier. Organizing your teaching materials, print teaching material labels in order to organize teaching materials that require multiple copies per student for each student content area. Inexpensive labels can be purchased on www.onlinelabels.com. The label information for this size label she has it listed here, and that information is also on your thumb drive.